welcome back. Welcome back to the later afternoon edition of On Deck. And we're on deck. Okay, so we're working on Prep Test 85, Section 2, Logical Reasoning, question number 6. The issue is Sam's response indicates that he interpreted Michaela's remarks to mean. Okay, so I'm going to read Michaela, and I'm going to stop and say, well, here's what I think Michaela meant. Then I'm going to read Sam and see what Sam heard that I myself didn't read. And here's what Michaela says. I think doctors who complain about patients doing medical research on the internet are being a little unfair. Okay, I got that. It seems only natural that a patient would want to know as much as possible about his or her condition. And I want to stop because I want to get what do I think Michaela just said? I think Michaela just said that, doctors who discourage you from going on the internet is probably unfair in that when you go on the internet, you're just gathering additional information. You're taking what's on the internet and you're adding it to whatever the doctor told you, and what's wrong with that? That's what I think Michaela said. Here's what Sam thinks Michaela said. Sam says, it is not unfair, so it's not. So the doctors are right. Okay, why, Sam? Doctors have undergone years of training. Okay, I agree with that. They have. How can you maintain that a doctor's opinion is not worth more than something an untrained person comes up with after searching the internet? So I do think I see what Sam saw, right? Sam saw Michaela's comments as the information on the internet that the patient was going to come across would replace, or at a minimum be equal to, the information that the doctor had provided her. So it's not, Michaela's saying that this is in addition to, and Sam's hearing it as in replacement of, substitute one for the other. So I got it. That's the misunderstanding. Now I'm just reading okay. So how did Sam interpret Michaela's response? Here's A. Did Sam interpret Michaela to say health information found on the internet is trustworthy? Is that what Sam got? Did Sam come away saying health information found on the internet is trustworthy? No. I like A, but Sam's saying something much more than that. It's not that it's trustworthy. Sam's saying that the patient is untrained, that the patient doesn't have a clue, the patient doesn't know what to look for. So it's not whether the information is trustworthy or not, it's the patient. You don't know what you don't know. You don't know what you're looking for. So that's not it. B, is Sam interpreting Michaela to have said that the opinion of a patient who has done internet research on his or her condition should have at least as much weight as the opinion of the doctor? So I'm going to reread that, but that's the answer. That what Sam heard that Michaela didn't say, Sam heard her say that the opinion of a patient who's done internet research on his or her condition should have at least as much weight as the opinion of a doctor. And that's not what Michaela said. Michaela was saying it's in addition to, not in replacement of. So B is the answer. You can keep reading if you're into S&M, but B is the answer. C is did Sam hear the following? Did Sam hear Michaela say the opinion of a patient's own doctor should not be given more weight than the opinions of doctors published on the websites? And that is not at all how Sam interpreted Michaela. Again, Sam's interpretation is, if you're clueless, what's the difference of the information? What's the difference that there's valuable information because you don't know what to look for? D, does Sam interpret Michaela as saying that a doctor's explanation of a patient's symptoms should be taken more seriously than the patient's own view of his or her symptoms? No, it's not related to whether it should be taken more seriously. what Sam heard Michaela say, what Sam understood Michaela to say, right, is that these clueless patients go online, they don't know what to look for, and then they use that information to replace the view of their own physician. E. Does Sam interpret Michaela as saying that patients who do not research their condition on the internet give their doctor's opinions more consideration? You can infer that, but it's simply not said here, and that's not the interpretation. That's not what happened here. So again, I really don't see how you do well on this test if you haven't formed the contours of what the answer has to look like before you've ever looked at the answers. So with respect to question number 6, it's B for Brutus. 7, which one of the following, if assumed, would most help to justify treating the human feeding of wild birds as an exception to the principle above? So this is definitely funky. This is an unusual issue. It's a principle issue. But then I look at it, it says principle and situation. And now I have to take a second and orient myself, because I don't know that I've seen this precise issue before. And so you want which of the following, if assumed, I got that, would most help justify the treating the human feeding of wild birds as an exception to the principle above. Okay, let's see what the principle is. Principle is people should not feed wild animals because it makes them dependent on humans and less likely to survive on their own. Now stop. So I get that. Okay, don't feed. So I'm out here on the deck and you're saying me don't feed there's a little robin right down there and they're all over the place, and so I don't want to feed you because if I feed you, you depend on me and you become less likely to survive if, I move somewhere else. And the person who replaces me doesn't feed you. Okay, I got that. Here's the situation. So now remember, we're going to justify my feeding the sparrow. Okay. Situation. Bird lovers commonly feed wild birds to attract them to their yards and gardens. So I want to justify the bird lovers commonly feeding wild birds to attract them to their yards and gardens. So basically, I want to justify my feeding the robin. Okay? Consistent with the principle that we shouldn't feed wild animals because it makes them dependent on us, and it makes it more difficult for them to survive. Okay, so we're going to support the exception, but it's okay for me to do it, notwithstanding that general principle. A. Congregating around human bird feeders makes wild birds more vulnerable to predators and diseases. So that's not helping the situation. That's just ended up with a lot of dead birds. That's the opposite of what we're trying to do here. B. Some species of wild birds benefit humans by consuming large number of mosquitoes and other insect pests. Well, that's great. So, Mr. Robin, thank you for eating the insects, but you're around me, you're here because I feed you. The insects are like, dessert. And you're still depending on my food, so that's not helping. C, wild birds are much more likely to congregate in yards where they are fed than in yards where they are not fed. Again, that seems like it's going to make the situation worse. D, most bird lovers are very active in efforts to preserve the habitats of threatened species of wild birds and other animals. So that's a non-starter. So what? What does that got to do with me feeding robin? E, human settlement is so pervasive in the habitat of most wild birds that they must depend in part on human sources of food for their survival. Human sources of food. And that would explain why, under this example, it would be okay for me to feed Mr. and Mrs. Robin. So the answer is E for Euphrates. Question number 7. Question number 8. The issue is, which one of the following most accurately expresses the conclusion drawn in the argument? Okay, well, there can only be one conclusion. Here goes. Normally, political candidates send out campaign material in order to influence popular opinion. Okay, so that's you telling me what they ordinarily do. They ordinarily send out material to influence popular opinion. Got it. But the recent ads for Epson's campaign were sent to too few households to serve this purpose effectively. Stop for a second. So now we're dealing with Epson's campaign, and Epson couldn't possibly have done it to influence popular opinion, we're told in the second sentence, because he sent out too few pieces. Got it. The ads were evidently sent out to test their potential to influence popular opinion. The ads were evidently sent out to test their potential to influence. So it wasn't that they were sent out in order to influence, they were sent out to measure the potential to influence popular opinion. Now that's a statement that has to be supported by evidence. That statement, right, is you're now assigning to these ads a purpose, right? That purpose is that we want to test their potential to influence popular opinion. So now let me see what follows this. They covered a wide variety of topics, and Epson's campaign has been spending heavily on follow-up to gauge their effect on recipients. And the final sentence adds evidentiary support to the third sentence. The third sentence suggests the purpose of the mailing, and the purpose of the mailing is to test their potential to influence popular opinion. The final sentence says, and here's what happened, which is they covered a wide variety of topics, and the follow-up spending has been very heavy. So so the answer is, the conclusion is the third sentence. The ads were evidently sent out to test their potential to influence popular opinion. That's all I'm looking for. A, normally, political candidates sent out campaign material to influence popular opinion. That is not the conclusion. That's not what happened in this case. B, the recent ads for Epson's campaign were sent to too few households to influence popular opinion effectively. That is a piece of evidence in support of the argument's main conclusion. C, the recent ads for Epson's campaign were sent out to test their potential to influence popular opinion. And that is the answer. And there is no reason to look anywhere past that. So C is the answer. That will continue. But on the test, it's C, good night, lights out, I got to go now. D, the recent ads for Epson's campaign covered a wide variety of topics. That is, again, a piece of evidence used to support the argument's conclusion. And E, Epson's campaign has been spending heavily on follow-up surveys to gauge the ad's effects on recipients, piece of evidence used in support of the argument's main conclusion. So the answer number 8 is C for Caligula. Question number 9. So we want to weaken the argument. Okay, which one of the following most weakens it? All right, I got it. Last year, pharmaceutical manufacturers significantly increased the amount of money that they spent promoting new drugs, which they do mainly by sending sales reps to visit physicians in their offices. Okay, so I'm now given the fact that last year, pharmaceutical manufacturers increased significantly the amount they spent to promote their drugs, and the manner in which they mainly accomplished that is by sending sales reps to physicians' offices. Got it. However, 2 years ago, there was an average of 640 such visits per rep, whereas last year, that figure fell to 501. So the number of visits per rep went down. Okay, what do you got for me now? So, which means that's it, you're done, you're going to give me your conclusion. So, the additional promotion must have been counterproductive, making physicians less willing to receive visits by the pharmaceutical sales representatives. Again, you're being told to weaken, so your mind should be, no, I've got this person on the stand, and I'm going to cross this person. So the devil here is, in the second sentence, to say to me that the number of visits per rep went down from 640 to 501 says nothing about the number of reps themselves. What happens if you've hired 40% more reps, right? So sure, any given rep is making fewer visits, but that's because you have more reps. So you weaken this argument by citing there probably are more reps out there than there were the prior year, which means the number of visits per rep falls. A, most pharmaceutical manufacturers increase the size of the sales force so that their sales representatives could devote more time to each physician. That would be the answer, right? You're increasing the size. You've hired more sales reps, and therefore the number per visit falls to Dr. So A's, I'd be out of here in A. You can keep reading. Again, it's a psychometric test. When you're sure of something, just get your ass out of there, and you're sure of it. If you're not sure of it, then you should continue reading. And if you're chronically unsure of stuff, you're probably not going to be a lawyer. Does B weaken the argument? Again, the argument is the conclusion being that the promotion must have been counterproductive, because there were fewer visits per rep. B says physicians who receive visits from pharmaceutical sales usually accept free samples of medication from the representative's company. So that's a kickback, so I hope they're not doing that. But no, what does that got to do with this? C, most pharmaceutical companies did not increase the amount of money they spent promoting drugs through advertising targeted directly at consumers. I have to again, I wouldn't be reading this, but for here I have to reread this. Most pharmaceutical companies did not increase the amount of money they spent promoting drugs through advertising targeted directly at consumers. Well, what has that got to do with the sales reps? D, most physicians who agree to receive a visit from a pharmaceutical sales rep will see that representative more than once during the year. Okay, but so that would have been, that's a constant. In other words, that would have been true the year before, it would have been true this year, that wouldn't change anything. And E, the more visits a physician receives from a pharmaceutical sales rep, the more likely he or she is to prescribe drugs made by that representative company. Okay, what has that got to do with this? So again, you need, it's all IRAC, it's get the issue, I'm weakening, get the rule is the argument, read it textually, say, now how can I weaken this? This one does kind of jump out at me. Sometimes it will not jump out at you, and that's okay. Then you have the answer choices to do that work for you, but you really want to do that work yourself where you can. So 9, the answer is A, and we'll close this out in question number 10. And again, we want an overall conclusion. Okay, there really is no difference between an overall conclusion, a conclusion, and a main conclusion. Okay, what would you have here? Archaeologists. The extensive network of ancient tracks on the island of Malta was most likely created through erosion caused by the passage of wheeled vehicles. Okay, so I would just say, you know what? That sounds like a statement that needs to be explained, and if it is explained, that's the argument's conclusion. So let me read that one more time. The extensive network of ancient tracks on the island of Malta was most likely created, so that's a view you have, that your view is it was most likely created through erosion caused by the passage of wheeled vehicles. Now, if the rest of this goes on to explain that, well, then that was the argument's conclusion. So let's see what we have. So, okay, it's the passage of wheeled vehicles. Next sentence. Some researchers have suggested the tracks were in fact manually cut to facilitate the passage of carts, citing the uniformity in track depth. Okay, so there are some reasons that have suggested that the tracks were manually cut. Okay, I got that. And why? To facilitate the passage of carts. But that's the argument's conclusion. That most likely that's what they would have done for, is passing carts. However, this uniformity is more likely indicative of wheel diameters. Routes were utilized until tracks eroded to a depth that made vehicle passage impossible. So the third sentence is, it's all going back to the first sentence where you're saying it was most likely created through erosion caused by the passage of a wheeled vehicle. And when you come down to this final sentence, they're saying the routes were utilized until tracks eroded. That's the use of wheeled vehicles to a depth that the vehicle couldn't go any further. So, the conclusion here is that first sentence. A, the extensive network of ancient tracks on the island of Malta was most likely created through erosion caused by the passage of wheeled vehicles. And that's the answer. And you stop, goodbye, lights out. Okay. B, some researchers have suggested that the ancient tracks on the island of Malta were in fact manually cut to facilitate the passages of carts. So that's one theory supporting the argument's conclusion that it was wheeled vehicles that caused those marks. C, so it's evidence, it's not a conclusion. C, some researchers cite the uniformity of the depth of the ancient tracks on the island of Malta to support the suggestion that they were manually cut. So again, there we're talking about the uniform depth, right, for wheeled vehicles. Evidence. D, the uniformity of depth of the ancient tracks on the island of Malta is probably indicative of the wheeled diameter of the carts that passed over them. Again, the tracks were made by passage of a wheeled vehicle, which is evidence. E, the ancient tracks on the island of Malta were utilized until they eroded to a depth that made vehicle passage impossible. Same thing. You're saying to me it was done by a wheeled vehicle. So the answer to question number 10 is A for Augustus, and we've gotten through questions 6 through 10 in this segment.